Hi everyone and welcome to IDG Live. Today we are looking at Viserys. Viserys III, as he styled himself. He always, from the time he was in Westeros onwards, he considered himself to be the king in exile. So this is sort of rounding off our Targaryen kings because he considered himself to be king, and some others also considered him to be king. But who is he? Well, as always, I'll try and answer as many questions as we can, but I want to start off with a little bit of an outline of his story, because we normally only just focus in on those few chapters that we have in Game of Thrones Book 1. So he was born in the year 276 after the conquest. He was the second-born child and son of the Mad King, Aerys II. And his birth was long awaited, because after their firstborn child, that's Rhaegar, there was then a very long gap, a 17-year gap between him and Viserys. In that period, it was tragedy after tragedy, sadly, for Aerys and Rhaella. They had, I think, 8 children, something in that order, die, stillbirths, early infant deaths, just one after another. And so when Viserys was born, healthy, robust, and survived, this was a cause for great celebration. But also, this was a cause for Aerys to start to get incredibly paranoid, because all of his other children had died. He's already starting to get a little bit paranoid about Rhaegar growing up, and now he's got another son. So he goes to extraordinary lengths to protect this child. He has somebody who's a food tester for the wet nurse's milk. He tries to make sure he never leaves the confines of the Red Keep, if at all possible. He doesn't even let him go to the marriage of his elder brother Rhaegar to Elia, not even going to the Great Sept of Baelor. That is how seriously he took this. So he was brought up in this incredibly opulent lifestyle. He's obviously a prince, a Targaryen prince, but also he didn't get out much, and he wasn't really allowed to do much. And this carried on for the first 7 years or so of his life. And for those 7 years, he was just the only other child that was there. And he was, we're told, growing up, he was small, but he was robust. It's not that he was like a weak child or anything like that. He sort of paled, is the impression we get, kind of paled in comparison to his older brother Rhaegar, who impressed absolutely everyone. But he had the traditional Targaryen looks, and seemed to have a degree of charisma about him. There were some hints we hear from Barristan Selmy that even then he took after his father. There was some hints of madness, we're told, even at quite an early age. But of course, the big turning point here was Robert's rebellion. And from this life he must have imagined as a child, carrying on forever, suddenly this is all at risk. And when it starts to reach the denouement of the rebellion, we get to the Battle of the Trident. Rhaegar suddenly comes back. He's disappeared for a long time. He suddenly comes back. He loses the Battle of the Trident and he dies. At which point we're told that Viserys is then named heir. Aerys names him heir. Now, this is intriguing. It's not unprecedented, but it is very much a snub to Rhaegar's children, specifically his eldest child, Aegon, who you would normally expect in the line of succession. Even if he died, his son would then be next in line. But Eris clearly decides that's it. He's done with that part of the family. He's now moving on, and his new heir is Viserys. And knowing that the armies would soon be coming to King's Landing, Eris sends his wife Rhaella and his son Viserys to Dragonstone, where the feeling was this was a more defendable position. It's obviously on an island. It's a relatively strong castle. It's also the Targaryen sort of homeland, really. So they knew it very well. They knew that they could trust the people there, or they thought they could trust the people there. So he sends Viserys off, and eventually news reaches Dragonstone that King's Landing has fallen and King Eris has been killed. Also, Elia is dead and her 2 children. So this leaves just 2 Targaryens left anywhere, as far as anyone's concerned. We have Rhaella, the queen, and Viserys, her son. Now, it soon transpires that Rhaella is actually pregnant with Daenerys. But clearly, at this point, Viserys had been named heir, and he is on Dragonstone. He is proclaimed king. So from this moment on, age 7, he is now king in his eyes and in the eyes of the small group around them. However, after we get to the end of Robert's rebellion, the King's Landing has fallen. Robert has had himself crowned, but there's still a few things that need to be sorted out afterwards. We'd see Ned Stark heads down to Storm's End, and then he heads off to the Tower of Joy. And King Robert, after Storm's End, the siege of Storm's End has been relieved, he gets Stannis, he commissions Stannis to get a navy and go and take out Dragonstone. That's where the last 2 Targaryens are. We'll take them out. Stannis takes a little while. Stannis is quite young at this point, to be fair to him. He takes a little while getting together a navy. And after 9 months, there is this huge storm. And in that storm, that is when Daenerys is born. And tragically, as she is born, her mother dies in childbirth. And this is why Daenerys, incidentally, is known as Daenerys Stormborn, because she was born in a storm. This keeps Stannis from attacking this storm. And soon after, Willem Darry, who had been the master at arms for the Targaryens in King's Landing and had basically been left in charge to be looking after what remains of the Targaryens, he gets a small boat and he puts Viserys and baby Daenerys and as much of the wealth of the Targaryens as he could into this boat, and they head over into exile over to the Braavosi coast. So that is the end of the Targaryens in Westeros. They arrive in Braavos, and some deal seems to have been cut with the Sea Lord of Braavos, who allows them to stay. Now, this seems to have been quite a pragmatic decision as far as we can tell. Clearly, they had money. Clearly, there had just been a rebellion against the Targaryens. But hey, maybe the Targaryens would manage to get their way back into power, in which case they would be very grateful to Braavos. So this seems to have been quite a pragmatic decision. And during this time, the feeling Willem Darry is still there. They live. This is where the house with the yellow door is. I did a whole video. Feel free to ask about it if you want, but I did a whole video about Dany's memories as a small child of the house with the red door, which is all the evidence seems to point in the gardens of the palace of the Sea Lord of Braavos. Now, that was a happy time for Dany, perhaps for Viserys as well. And Willem Darry is, during this time, doing a little bit of wheelie-dealing. There clearly was this thought maybe they could try and get their way back into power. What allies might they be able to have over in Westeros? They do get an alliance talk about this a little bit later. I've got a couple of questions about it. They do get an alliance potentially with Dawn, which is the agreement is that Princess Ariane, who we meet in A Song of Ice and Fire much later, will marry Viserys in exchange for so she becomes his queen in exchange for Dawn supporting Viserys when he comes into to reclaim his throne in Westeros. Now, this was going to be kept secret until such time as Viserys had his army. So this was now on Viserys, or Willem Darry at the time, to be getting this army, to be coming and re-invading Westeros. And this thought clearly seems to have been in the forefront of Viserys' mind from this moment on. How do I reclaim my kingdom? How do I get back to Westeros? But Viserys wasn't told about that pact, it would appear, with Dawn. And so Willem Darry, who was getting on a little bit, he died. And perhaps I have a feeling there probably was a change of political leadership in Braavos. The Sea Lord changed, and Viserys and his small sister Daenerys get kicked out. And for the next few years, they tour the free cities, always trying to curry favor with people. Can I raise an army here? Can I get these people to support me? And Viserys was having to give out all of this wealth that they'd managed to take away from Dragonstone. He's paying for these things. At one point, he entertains the Golden Company. Perhaps they might support him. They just eat his food, laugh at him, and no, they will not. And we get this list of all of these cities that they've been. They go to Myr, they go to Tyrosh, they go to Cohor, Valantis, and eventually they end up in Pentos. And by this point, he's 20. Early 20s. When he dies, he's only 22, so he's probably about 20, 21 by this point. And Dany is still only 12. And Magister Illyrio Mapatis takes them in, and they stay there for 6 months. And Illyrio seems to have this plan that he will help Viserys get an army, as long as when Viserys is in power, then Illyrio will get some, we assume, unspecified rewards out of it. Now, the plan seems to be that Daenerys would be married off to Khal Drogo, and Khal Drogo, with his massive Khalasar, will then attack. Will go with Viserys to attack Westeros, and everyone agrees that the Dothraki are the preeminent fighting force in Essos, and there's no reason anyone thinks why this shouldn't be the same in Westeros. And if you look at a map of Essos, just to kind of get a feel for this, if you look at a map of Essos, in the middle there's this huge swathe that we think of as the Dothraki Sea. That did not used to all be there like that. While the Valyrian Empire was around, that was covered in towns and cities and civilizations. After the Valyrian Empire collapsed, the Dothraki just worked their way across pretty much the entire continent, destroying city after city, civilization after civilization. They go through a few of these. If you read Dany's chapters, they go through a few of these ruined towns. When they get to Vace Dothrak, the heart of I was going to say the Dothraki Empire, it's not really an empire, but the heart of their culture, there's this road where alongside it are all the gods of these civilizations that they've destroyed. They just take them as prizes and bring them back to be lining their return into Vace Dothrak. So this clearly is an amazing army to have. However, the Magister Illyrio is very aware Viserys never really quite clicks onto this, but culturally, this is not a deal where they've sort of signed a contract that Drogo gets Dany and then Viserys gets the army. As far as Drogo is concerned, this is a matter of like, you have done this for me, and at some point I will do something for you. So the wedding ceremony happens, and then Khal Drogo says, okay, well, that's it. I am heading off. I'm going back to in towards Vaes Dothrak with my Khalasar, and Viserys is there going, what? You're supposed to now be on my team. You're supposed to be following me. We're going to be invading Westeros. And he decides he's just going to go with them. He could stay in Pentos, but he wants to accompany them because he does not trust them, because he thinks, hey, we came to an agreement, and they're now reneging on that agreement. So he goes with them. And this is really where we see in book one, in Game of Thrones, we see quite how he cannot cope with being in a completely different culture, but also with not being in a position of power. He sees everything as an insult. If somebody is sent to request his presence somewhere, then he sees that as an insult. If he's ordered to do something, it's an insult. If he's sat somewhere that is not the most important position in a feast, that is an insult. He does not react well to this at all, it has to be said. And eventually he, when Dany says, I just want to go off into the grasses for a while and just sort of like have a look around, basically, she orders her part of the Khalasar to pause, to stop for a moment. Viserys gets angry with this. He heads off, finds her, and basically starts attacking her, at which point a member of the Khalasar stops him, a whip around the neck, pulls him back. She says, no, don't kill him. This is my brother. But his horse is taken away and he's made to walk. This, for the Dothraki, is the greatest insult. Eventually, they say you can sit in a cart. Now, he thinks, this is them saying sorry, letting me sit in a cart. But for them, this is an even greater insult, because this is where the people who can't even walk are put. And he gets known by them. It's Carl Ragat, I think they call him, which is like the cart king, basically. He gets into Vaes Dothrak, by which time Dany then becomes pregnant. And at Vaes Dothrak, he's still seeing absolutely no sign that this army will ever appear to him. But at Vaes Dothrak, which is this gathering point, it's almost like the center point of Essos. You get the Western market and the Eastern market, and in both of those places, you get the traders come in from all across Westeros, and so you can get things that you could not get elsewhere. He decides he's going to see whether he can hire an army. By this point, he doesn't have any money. He tries to steal one of Dany's dragon's eggs. Jorah stops him. But he heads in thinking, well, maybe at this Western market, they've got stuff coming in from everywhere. Maybe I can get some wine. He loves wine. He hates the fermented horse milk that the Dothraki drink. And he gets drunk. And he finds himself a sword. Swords are banned in Vaes Dothrak. And then he comes back into the ceremony that Dany is taking part in at the time. There's this sort of the auguries for the baby. This is the one where she's having to eat the horse's heart. Viserys is late, staggers in drunk, loudly objects to where he's been told he has to sit, starts waving his sword above his head, a huge insult to them. And this is the point where Khal Drogo snaps, and Viserys demands his crown, his golden crown, and Drogo gives him his golden crown. We've seen it. We know how it happens. One little just nuance here that I didn't quite bring out in the show so much, is definitely there in the books, is that Dany gives him the nod to say yes. This is her. Whether Khal Drogo would have held back anyway, we do not know. But he looks to her first, and she goes, yeah, do it. It's his time. And so he dies. Now, that is the short, sad life of Viserys. He was not a good man by any stretch of the imagination. He was a bully, is probably the politest way of saying it to Daenerys. He was basically an abuser of her, both physically as well as mentally. And he told her many times that the plan was that he was going to be marrying her. He went just before the wedding ceremony to Khal Drogo. He attempted to sneak into her chamber, just so that he could get in there first, so to speak. He was stopped. All the way through this, his reputation became the beggar king. He grew angry, he grew petulant, but he never lost his ambition to retake Westeros. And Dany, it has to be said, whenever she looks back at him, which she does quite a few times after his death, she does look back and kind of reflect on who he was and what role he had in her life. And she does not shrink from seeing all of the bad things that were there. But also she does kind of recognize that he did feed her and keep her alive, and he did instill within her everything that she knows about Targaryens, and this feeling that they were unfairly stripped of what was theirs, of the Iron Throne, comes from him. And so this is what has moved on to her, and that is what she takes with her from him. So he's a character, we often just think of him as being this really horrible character. But there are layers there. He did not have an upbringing which was a loving and caring one. His father was the Mad King. Then he was kicked out of home and he was completely homeless. He had to be bringing up his baby sister on his own. He was laughed at by people. None of this excuses him, but he is slightly more complex, I think, than we sometimes paint him to be. And the fact that he's only around really for a few chapters probably also simplifies him in a lot of our minds. He was not... in fact, I will come back to that. Let's get into a few questions. I think that kind of rounds off his character and his background and his history. So let's try and get into a few questions here. The Mucker saying, "Hi, Robert. Hope you're well. I'm writing about the Targaryens and magic. I just finished Fire and Blood. And other than Visenya and a few Dragon Dreams, the Targaryens don't seem to practice very much magic for being a Valyria." No, well, I suppose it depends on what you mean by magic in this. Targaryens, as a whole, there's the Dragon Dreams. Now, whether this counts as practicing magic or just a magical thing that happens to them, they are there a lot in Targaryens. And obviously, dragons themselves are magical, and so the bond between Targaryens and dragons is magical. As for what we might call sorcerers and the like, Visenya's the only one who is rumored to do the magic stuff really herself, but even then, it's more sort of like getting magic in from others. Taylor of the Tower is the classic example there, of course. Later on, after Fire and Blood Part 1, you do get this period when I mentioned it a few times when we're going through it. There's this period around when Bloodraven was younger. When we had Bloodraven, we had Shearer Seastar, we had Aerys I, we had all 4 of Maekar's sons were dragon dreamers. That was the height of Targaryen magiciness, as it were. But even when we get to Aegon V, he brought in pyromancers, fire magicians, basically, from Mashai to try and hatch the dragon eggs. So there is some magic, or there are some magic users within the Targaryens. There is an underlying magicalness about them with the dreams and with the dragon bonding. And there is also an acceptance that magic is real, which I think is probably one of the most significant, if understated, things, is most Targaryens just accept that magic is real in a way that the Faith of the Seven, or well, the Maesters in particular, just try and deny that magic is real. Most Targaryens, not all by any stretch of the imagination, but most Targaryens do accept that magic is real and therefore will use magic users when they can or want to. Let's go to a question from Nicole Knock saying, "Happy Thursday, Robert. Happy Thursday to you too. I have a theory that Jon's name should have been Viserys. One, because of his siblings' names, but also because of what it will mean for Dany when she finally meets Jon and it comes to light who he is. Thoughts?" Oh, this is interesting. So, I mean, there's a slight digression, but I suppose the Viserys is the link here. What is Jon's name? So for this, I'm a full 99.9% believer in R plus A equals J. So Jon is Rhaegar and, well, R plus L equals J, I should say, Rhaegar and Lyanna's son. Now, I think the starting point for what his name is, I did a video on this ages ago. I won't go into this in the same amount of detail here. If you want to look at it, have a search for it, it was probably called something like "Why is Jon called Aegon?" I think I did it, when I say ages ago, after the revelation of his name in Game of Thrones, the TV show. And a lot of people then said, "Oh, he shouldn't be called Aegon." And I take as the starting point for any thinking on this, what the situation is, who named him, and what the situation was. Now, the situation that you have there is that clearly Rhaegar was, as I say clearly, it appears quite clear, he was trying to name his children after the original 3 Targaryens, Aegon and his sister wives. And that seems to imply that he is expecting a daughter who he would name Visenya. Here, now, that therefore is the name. When he left the Tower of Joy, left a pregnant Lyanna, he will, because he was a 100% believer. Rhaegar, you will never find a time when he was like, "Oh, maybe this will happen, maybe that." No, it's like, "I will do this, then I will come back, then we will do this." It's like he's a complete believer in prophecy and his role within prophecy. He thought that he was going to come back. And what he will have said is he wants his daughter, because I'm convinced he will have thought he will have a daughter, to be called Visenya, because there must be another. The dragon has 3 heads. This is the vision that Dany saw, and the naming of the 2 children he's already had. So he goes off and he gets killed. And then his children get killed. And then this leaves Lyanna having her baby on her own. Yes, there's Kingsguard hanging around, and I'm sure a maester came in, but she's there. She's the person who's having to name this baby. What does she do when she finds out? Obviously, if this was a girl, then Visenya, but it's a boy. Now, at this point, what does she do? She has two options, I think. Option number one, which is I think where this perhaps leads, is you just say, okay, so I'll just do the boy version of Visenya, which is Viserys. So that is entirely possible. And as you say, that then leads to an issue with when Dany, assuming this happens in the books, if Dany meets Jon and they just discover who he is and what his real name is and he's Viserys, that will have a very visceral reaction for her. But the other thing that Lyanna could have done, which is where my instinct goes, is that she goes, well, I don't know what Rhaegar would have named a son. She might have wanted to name him after Rhaegar, but maybe she wished to honor the son, Rhaegar's son. Maybe it would have been too much to her to be naming her newborn child after the man that we think loved and then lost. Maybe she just wishes to name it in his honor after his firstborn son, Aegon. So that kind of makes sense to me. So Viserys, I mean, it wouldn't be a shock to me if it's called Viserys, but logically, I personally think that Aegon seems to work a little bit better. Maura Lee, hi there, Maura, saying, just to show love and appreciation for all you do. Love the fabulous merch, content, and stories. You are the best. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Hugely appreciate your support. As always, Maura. Let's go to, I think I had another question. Yep, so here we go. Roman Lakovets saying, my impression is that George had not yet thought of Fagon back when he was writing A Game of Thrones, book 1. But what plans could Varys and Illyrio have for Viserys without Fagon in the picture? So I've got a couple of questions from my patrons about the bigger Varys and Illyrio plans. So I'll cover that broadly there. But I will pick up on this here, if it's okay. Did George R. R. Martin come up with Fagon a little bit later? Well, we don't know because he's not confirmed that. The fact is, we know that they were plotting. This was in book 1. Arya overhears the two of them discussing this. And what they're basically saying, or that conversation that Arya overhears, she doesn't really understand what it's about. But basically, Illyrio comes over, and Varys tells him what's going on, and Illyrio tells Varys what's going on. And Illyrio says, we need a bit more time. Clearly, the idea is there was going to be a civil war. And while the civil war was happening, or perhaps just after the civil war has happened and the continent is on its knees, that is when Viserys and the Dothraki come and invade. Now, did George R. R. Martin initially just think maybe Varys and Illyrio are just fanboys of Viserys? Personally, I don't think so. Simply because Illyrio had seen Viserys and he never really gives the impression of being that impressed by him. So I think perhaps George R. R. Martin was always, even from quite an early stage, thinking of something else beyond just we're going to get Viserys on the throne. But certainly from the beginning, phase 1 of their plan was this, let's get Viserys. They genuinely thought this would happen. The Dothrakis being led by Khal Drogo, but Viserys into Westeros. What plans without Fagon in the picture? I mean, I guess that you could just say, if George R. R. Martin at that point, I think you're right that he hadn't fully worked up his entire world and history and story. We know that he's a Gardner writer, and he does add to it as he's going. Could it just be that they're backing Viserys? Possibly. If Aerys thinks that he would be better than Robert Baratheon, but I don't know. I think that even from the beginning, he thought there was something more going on. Let's go to a question from actually Andrew K just in the chat saying it doesn't excuse who he became and some awful stuff he does, but Viserys dealt with some incredible trauma, loss, upheaval from a young age. At least we understand the how or why. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we're supposed to be. Callie Summers, hi there, saying tinfoil. Jorah got Viserys drunk and armed him. I did get a question. Was it from you? Maybe in the maybe it wasn't. So somebody in the in my patrons asked a similar question. But did Jorah get Viserys drunk and arm him? Well, this is what happens. The bit I sort of hinted at a little bit, that right in that very last day of his life, Viserys decides that he wants to go and find some wine, and he wants to hire himself an army. He tries to hire he tries to steal a dragon egg so that he can pay for this army, and then he emerges a bit later, very drunk and with a sword. Might that have been Jorah doing it? Well, my instinct is no. Jorah clearly by this point was on Dany's side. I think he clearly saw that Viserys was not the person who should be king of the Seven Kingdoms, and he clearly saw that he was starting to seriously annoy Khal Drogo. But would he have had the motivation to try to push Viserys to do some things that would push Khal Drogo over? I think that's a little bit Machiavellian for me, a little bit Machiavellian for Jorah. And we have to remember that at this point he is very much still in the pay of Varys, and there's no indication that Varys at this point in time would want Jorah to be getting Viserys dead. And Michelle Raimo saying, I always wondered, what if Viserys lived and they successfully took Westeros? Did he just expect Drogo to step aside so then he could then marry Dany in the Targaryen tradition once the war ended? Well, I mean, Viserys' expectations, yeah, perhaps. But I suspect if Viserys had worked through in his mind what it was he thought might happen, he was deluded. Again, we'll unpack this a little bit more later, but he was deluded in his mind in that he thought that when he got to Westeros, that people would be welcoming him with open arms. Come back, our Targaryen leaders. We've missed you. We want you to be ruling over us. And yes, there were some rebels who for a time took over, but the Dothraki can get rid of them. And then after that, well, I thought the people will be able to rise up and get rid of the Dothraki. I think perhaps that was his thinking. He never really had any thought. If you go through his actions, he never really at any point had these thoughts about, wow, I might be in danger here. These guys are really tough. So he would charge in places with swords. He would shout at Khal Drogo. He would be hurling abuse at people. He felt he was so entitled that the thought that somebody would just get in his way. Just seems not to cross his mind. So yeah, I don't think it's a clever plan. Does he expect Khal Drogo to step aside? Probably not, but he thinks that he can just tell people to get rid of him and he'll be gone. But yes, I think he probably would have wanted to marry Dany afterwards. Colin McVie 2 saying, "Hi Robert, if Varys and Illyria had been raising Fagon to be king, why did they support Viserys?" Yeah, I've got questions all around this. When I get to them, I will answer this bit in full. So hold out for that. But the short answer, which I'll happily give now, is that they seem to have this idea that they can get Viserys to come over and get rid of the opposition with the Khalasar. And then their guy can come in and follow up and be, oh, actually, you know what? I'm the king. And get rid of, because people would see what Viserys was like. So I think that it was almost a two-stage plan. Their plan, however, shifts a lot over time. It has to be said, which is what I think why a lot of people get confused about this. I will be doing some videos on this. I've said this for a while there now. I was talking to Aziz from History Westeros about this very thing just a couple of days ago. So I think we've got an idea for a couple of videos that we can do to probably explain this in more depth. But yeah, the Viserys in part 1 of their plan is their useful idiot who can come in and reclaim the throne for the Targaryens, and then their guy can get in there. And I think I've got one more question. Oh, a couple more questions. Username Redacted saying, which noble houses would actually support Viserys' invasion? Well, I mean, this is a good question. Again, the questions here are the same questions I'm getting from my patrons, which is fantastic because it means I think everyone's very focused in on these things. He has a very clear idea of who these houses are who would support him, which are the Tyrells, the Redwynes, the Darrys, the Greyjoys, and the Martells. That's who he thinks will definitely be supporting him, and he thinks that the small folk will all rise up for him. Now, is he right in any of that? Well, there's some indications that some of them might, so it's not completely delusional. There's the marriage pact with the Dornish. The Dornish hates the Lannisters, anything to get rid of the Lannisters. And we know Doran Martell's cunning plan is always, let's just marry off my family to the Targaryens. But House Darry, yes. When Jaime goes to House Darry, he lifts up one of the tapestries and there's a Targaryen one hidden behind here. So they're secretly, and that's not a surprise. Obviously, Willem Darry, the Master at Arms, he was the guy who saved Viserys and Daenerys right after Robert's rebellion. So it makes sense, House Darry. But House Darry aren't a major force. As for the others, the Greyjoys, I mean, is Balon Greyjoy really going to be coming in behind the Targaryens? His first thought will be that he wants independence for himself. The Tyrells, this seems to be largely based on the idea the Tyrells were on the side of the Targaryens during Robert's Rebellion, which they were technically. But when you dig into actually what happened, the Tyrells, actually, they won the only battle, or probably more accurately, we should say the Reach army, because it wasn't really so much the Tyrells, it was the van of their army, which was actually led by Sam's dad. They defeated Robert Baratheon's army, the only defeat that Robert Baratheon had in the entire war. But then Mace Tyrell decided not to follow up on that, but instead to take his force down and besiege Storm's End, which was and I'm convinced this was the Queen of Thorns, Olenna Tyrell's idea, because it's a bit of a stroke of genius. If you want to remain neutral in the war, but you wish to give the impression of supporting the king, because you're supposed to support the king. How do you go about doing that? Well, rather than inflicting huge amounts of damage on the enemy, you take your army, the biggest army in all of Westeros. We always overlook this, the Reach army, massive army, plus the Red Wine fleet, one of the 3 biggest fleets in Westeros, along with the Royal Fleet and the Iron Fleet. And let's go and besiege Storm's End. It makes complete sense from a presentational view, because this is the home of the Baratheons, and Robert Baratheon's leading the rebellion. So, of course, you're just taking the fight to them. But tactically, no. Of course, it means nothing. Storm's End can't be stormed easily at all. You just have to try and starve the people out. So you camp outside and don't do anything for an entire year, which is what the Tyrells did. So, theoretically, they were on the side of the Targaryens. In reality, they were staying neutral. So not many is the short answer. But in all of these things, if they had the power, if the Targaryens came back and looked like they were going to win, then people would probably start falling in behind them, because that's the nature of how the Game of Thrones works. Martin S. saying, good evening, Robert. I hope you and the dog are all right. No question at the moment. Well, great to see you, Martin S. Yes, I am well. Dan is well. He's taken himself off to bed, as he usually does. I think I had one more question here. So, Andrew Viniecki, saying, the true King Robert, thank you. So happy to catch live, a long-time fan, and all the rest of it. Well, thank you very much. Hugely appreciate that. Let's get into some of these questions from my patrons now. Keep the questions and comments coming in the chat. I will keep on picking up on them as we're going through. Sebastian Jumala saying, hello, Robert. Hope you're having a fantastic autumn. I am. Dog walks in autumn, fall, as I know you say over in America, is can be beautiful. The colours when you're out, amazing. Viserys was known for his obsession with his sister Daenerys, his abusive treatment of her, and his desire to use her marriage to gain an army and retake the Iron Throne. Can you elaborate on the alliances and marriages he tried to arrange for Daenerys to further his own goals? I think Dawn played a big part there, but she ultimately ended up with Khal Drogo, much to her brother's demise. So yeah, this is a fascinating thing, is that we don't actually read of anything that he does. Now, this shouldn't be a surprise to start with. He is, as I say, he was 7 to start with. So him being sort of a diplomatic genius is a bit hard to sort of pin him down for at that age, to expect him to do much. The deal that was done with Dawn was done behind his back. He had no knowledge of this whatsoever. Dany had no knowledge of this whatsoever. And so when they left, he was about 13 when they left Braavos and then traveled around. So he's still a child. Suddenly he's got this huge responsibility on his shoulders, because Willem Darry's no longer there. He's got to look after his sister, who's only 6, traveling around a continent where he doesn't know the cultures, meeting people. He tries to get alliances, but always seems to fail. The one that we read about specifically is the Golden Company. There's a hint there, perhaps, that he was laughed at, that they just weren't that impressed with him, but also perhaps they had another deal. Maybe Illyrio by this point had already been in contact with them. So he tries to get the Golden Company. He goes to other places to try and he's spending his money to try and get alliances, but basically he runs out of money. So when he gets up to Pentos, and Dany is by that point 13, that's really the first time that he can actually try and use her in a marriage to try and gain some kind of advantage. So is it? I mean, did he try? Yes, he did. Was there ever any real chance of him succeeding? No, not really. He didn't get any alliances. It's very clear that by the time they get up to Pentos, Illyrio is the only one who's really taking them in now. That's it. He's not got any friends anywhere. It's still just the two of them. It's really noticeable that when they're there in Pentos and they leave Pentos, Dany's not got like maidservants to go with her. She's not got any guards of her own there. She's just headed out on her own, basically, with the Dothraki. So they've got nothing. And he did not achieve any alliances on his own behalf or for Dany. Dominic Vaughan. Hi, Robert. Shout out for the wonderful content and the mods. Yes, moderators, thank you so much. An early shout out for the moderators, but you deserve it. If you're in the live chat, please show the moderators a bit of love. They do amazing work there. Dominic Vaughan says, wondering on your take on whether Viserys had any dragon dreams or any awareness of the prophecy. Right. I think I had another question about this as well, but let's get into this one here. So, dragon dreams, we never get any hint that he gets dragon dreams. Would we? I mean, maybe. We don't get anything from his POV, so we don't ever... we don't know what he was literally dreaming about. One clue I think we do have is that when we get the dragon eggs, the thought never seems to cross his mind to try and hatch them. Dany, all the way through, she gets these dragon dreams of dragons coming to life, of hatching dragons. He thinks of stealing a dragon egg to sell it, but he doesn't seem to be thinking about, I wonder whether we could magically get these dragon eggs to hatch. So that doesn't seem to be there. But that doesn't mean that he didn't have those dragon dreams. As for the prophecy, if we're talking about the prophecy that we really learned about in House of the Dragon, the ones passed down, this threat from the north, the Targaryens have to rule, have to be in charge of all of the Seven Kingdoms. That prophecy, Aegon's prophecy, the Song of Ice and Fire, did he know about it? Well, he certainly doesn't seem to have mentioned it to Dany. And he was telling her about how amazing the Targaryens are, how special the Targaryens are. And you would have thought that as a part of that, he would have passed that down to her. Because he didn't hold back. He told her pretty much everything about how amazing they were. So I think the clear implication is he did not. However, one thing which he was obsessed by, and we have to, I think, in all of these things with Targaryens and dragon dreams and prophecy, we have to look at what are they obsessed with. And some Targaryens get obsessed with hatching dragons. Viserys was obsessed with taking back the Iron Throne, being king of the Seven Kingdoms once more. Now, we don't often challenge this. We just accept this as a part of his character. But he could have given up on that. All rationality suggested that he probably should. Maybe he could carry on with a grudge for a while. But realistically, after Robert's Rebellion had happened, it settled down, everybody had accepted the new king and the way that the world was. The Targaryens had gone. After they'd lost whatever kind of tacit agreement that they'd had with Braavos, the most powerful, really, of the free cities. After he'd gone and tried to hire the Golden Company and failed, after he'd gone to almost all of the free cities seeking alliances and failed, after he'd had to sell everything and he had absolutely nothing and he was mocked as the beggar king, at some point, rationality you think might start to kick in, and him go, well, this might not happen. This might not happen. Maybe our time has gone. Maybe we should just like set up shop somewhere, try and make the best of it, slowly gather some money back in some way, and maybe try and get some good marriages for ourselves, and then work our way back from there. But that thought never crosses his mind for a second. Even when it's just him in this Dothraki Khalasar heading in, and he's lost absolutely everything, and he's convinced that the Dothraki are reneging on their promise. What's his priority? His priority is, okay, how can I get an army from somewhere else? There's a market over here. Maybe I can find some sellswords. Where can I get some? I can steal this dragon egg. I can take it's mine effectively. Anyway, his mind is always focused in on retaking the Seven Kingdoms, and that obsession sometimes for Targaryens does seem to come from dragon dreams in some kind of way. So although we can't say that he had them, and although there's limited evidence that he had dragon dreams about hatching dragons, and there's limited evidence that he knew about that prophecy, he definitely was obsessed with it. And somehow that got through to him. Okay, let's go to a couple of questions in the chat. Question from Reflective Rambling. Picking up a question. Thank you. I love it when you do things like this. Very generous, Reflective Rambling. This is picking up for Dex Z, saying, hi, Robert. Do you think the eggs would still hatch if Viserys survived? It's an interesting question. So George R. R. Martin, when he's asked about those eggs hatching, he says that this is and I forget the exact quote, but he basically says this is a magical, unique, wondrous event. Everything, all the stars aligned, everything worked out exactly as it should have been. You get the sacrifices, you get the red comet in the sky, you get Dany just sort of suddenly figuring it out, you get the fire, you get prophecy sort of converging in on it. Everything is exactly right in that moment, and that's what made the dragon eggs hatch. Now, would that have happened if Viserys had been there? Well, probably that set of circumstances wouldn't have happened. So maybe if Khal Drogo had still died, and then he had a funeral pyre, would Viserys have been sort of hanging around? No, probably not. He would have been spending his time going and trying to get the Khalasar on his side, and almost certainly being killed. So I can't personally see any chain of events in which case that particular scenario would have happened in that particular way that allowed for that dragons to hatch, the eggs to hatch, if Viserys was still around, unless he just leaves her to it and lets her do her thing while he's trying to raise an army or something. It's an interesting thought experiment, but the moment was perfect, and if he had changed something about it, then it would not have been perfect. Joel the Dreamer saying his best bet, I assume, was to go east, and I mean far to the east, to a coastal Yetish prince with a navy to invade Westeros. Yeah, well, where could he have done? I mean, perhaps he could have done that. He faced the same problem wherever he went, which is that he would have to spend a lot of money to hire some people who wanted to fight for him, because he himself clearly didn't have the personal charisma and leadership qualities required to gather a force of people around him to support his claim personally. That was not going to happen. His best hope for that was the Golden Company, who were exiles from Essos, and maybe they could see that as an opportunity for them to get back to Westeros. But even there, what could he offer them? Some money, and what they could get money anyway for just being sellswords in Essos. And he didn't bring anything else to the table. So that made no sense. Could he have gone to Yee and got something? Yeah, absolutely. He could have gone to Astapor and tried to get himself some Unsullied and a boat or two and bring them across. The fact is that I don't think in any event, unless he did it straight away with absolutely every bit of money that they had, plus his mother's crown, which was the last thing he sold off, with all of that, then I don't think he would have hired a big enough army to be able to take over the Seven Kingdoms. Chaos Ballerina pointing out that he was obsessed with waking the dragon. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, his language there is very instructive. So he talks about waking the dragon, and this in Dany's imagination, in Dany's dragon dreams, this often morphs into literally waking the dragon, getting the dragons hatched out of the dragon eggs. So perhaps that was a thing from his dragon dreams that sort of came through to him, waking the dragon. Maybe we don't have any real evidence one way or the other, though. It struck me, and in the same kind of vein that Diren the First, the young king who came to power and decided that he was the first king after the death of the last dragon. So his father Aegon III had been there while the last dragon died, and then he took over. And he immediately says, "I'm going to go and invade Dawn." And people around him go, "Well, we don't have any dragons anymore." And he goes, "I am the dragon." And that's the kind of feel I get from Viserys, is this, I am the dragon. Whether this thought comes from him having dragon dreams about dragons being awoken, we don't know. Chaos Ballerina saying, do you think he has any bastards running around Essos? It's possible. It's very possible. This is one of those things. I mean, George R. R. Martin is very relaxed about bastard children, in the sense that he kind of says, to whenever you ask him about a lot of these characters, he kind of says, yeah, probably. So you get, just to pick a couple of random examples, Brandon Stark, Ned Stark's older brother. He was asked specifically about Brandon Stark. Did he have any bastard children? And he sort of went, yeah, well, the important point is that he didn't have any legitimate children, but there might be a few snows running around the north. Doesn't really affect the plot, though. And similarly, when we get I've forgotten his name now. I always get a mind blank at least once in a live stream. Egg's older brother, the horrible Targaryen, who incidentally he appears in Duncan Egg, which is narrated by Harry Lloyd, who plays Viserys in Game of Thrones, and an excellent job he does as well. Aerion, there we go. Aerion Brightflame. He spent some time in exile in Essos, and George R. R. Martin was asked, did he have any bastard children there? And he said, yeah, probably. So I think that the answer to this is Yeah, probably. If George R. R. Martin were asked, it doesn't, as far as he's concerned, this does not impact on the story, but it's likely. Joel the Dreamer. There is a major gap in this story in that many wealthy nobles in Essos would be eager to have a daughter as queen. Yes, so I think the implication here, if I'm understanding you correctly, is that many noble daughters in Essos would want to marry Viserys, or their parents would want their daughters to marry Viserys, thinking that then makes them a queen. Now, yes, but with a big asterisk next to it, which is, first of all, he is not, although he claims the title King Viserys III, he is known as the Beggar King quite soon after leaving Braavos. So it's not as if this is seen as a social step up. He's almost a laughingstock as he's heading around Essos. There's no potential that anyone can see that he would ever retake the Iron Throne, and they've got no source of income. They're just basically spending all of their savings until all their savings dwindled and died. So there's no monetary advantage for anyone. There's no real social advantage for anyone. Yes, there could be some, so that the top nobles probably would be out with that. Then you get to kind of the middling nobles, and yeah, maybe I'm sure there will be people there who would happily marry Viserys or marry their daughter to Viserys. But Viserys was very clear. I don't have the exact quote in front of him, but basically, in the same way that his father was very clear that, you know, Targaryens, they don't marry down. They don't marry down. We just marry. We have to keep the blood pure. He was going to marry his sister. So yes, I think the short answer to this is yes. There may well have been many people wanting to marry him, but he did not want to marry any of them because he had what he considers standards. Nicole Nark, what were his strengths, if any, as a ruler? Battle, laws, taxes. I just can't imagine Viserys actually enjoying ruling. Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree with that. Barristan Selmy does basically say he was very much like his father, the Mad King. And so did Aerys II enjoy ruling? Well, I think he enjoyed the power, and I think Viserys would enjoy the power, but he wouldn't necessarily enjoy the nitty-gritty of ruling, which is why, although it was an incredibly strained relationship and got very bad towards the end, the relationship between Aerys and Tywin Lannister worked really well, because Tywin Lannister was a details person. He actually ran the Seven Kingdoms while Aerys was being king. And so that perhaps is the only way that could really work. As for his strengths, we're not really shown them, is the honest answer. This is he is a character who has layers, but I think the only real strength that you can see there is his very clear vision, determination. He just simply does not give up. And so once he's decided on something, he's going for it. So that obviously has upsides and downsides. If you've ever worked for or with somebody who is like that, then you will, I'm sure, appreciate that. But yeah, he clearly, in his mind, he's going to invade Westeros, and he's going to carry on trying different ways to invade Westeros until he actually succeeds it. Okay, let's go to some questions from my patrons. Dominic Vaughan, a question asking, do I think that Rhaegar ever contemplated using his brother Viserys as one of the three heads of the dragon other than his own offspring? I think the short answer to that is no. The only information we have on this is looking at Rhaegar's actions, and then that vision that Dany had in the House of the Undying, where she sees Rhaegar with baby Aegon, with his second child, and saying there must be one more. The dragon must have 3 heads. That clearly implies that, because Viserys is already around at that point, that Viserys is not one of the 3 heads of the dragon that Rhaegar imagines. It's his 3 children. So I think the short answer there is no. He never seriously considered it. Might he have at some point? Rhaegar shared Viserys's very, very focused approach to life. Rhaegar was a lot more focused in on prophecy, and he was willing to change his mind about things. So maybe at some point he would, but certainly during his lifetime, no. There's no indication that was what he was thinking at any point. Joel the Dreamer saying Brandon's snows are in the Riverlands. He travelled widely. This idea that the Starks are isolated and don't travel outside the north is a big misconception among fans. Brandon spent years in the Riverlands. Well, he was the reason why George R. R. Martin said snows rather than rivers was because he was fostered in the south of the north. The House Riswell, I believe it was. So that's where he spent most of his youthful years. Then you got 3-year winter before the year of the full spring, and you got the betrothal to Catelyn Stark. Yes, he may well have spent some time down in the Riverlands, but George R. R. Martin, I think George R. R. Martin, when he talked about snows, for those who don't know why I'm talking about snows and rivers, you get your bastard surname. If you're a highborn bastard child, then you are given the surname, and it's a different surname according to which different part you are born in. So if you are born in the north, then it's Snow, hence this idea of Jon Snow, although technically he should have been Jon Sand. It's then you get rivers and hill and things like that. Yes, he could have had them there, but I more likely in the north is my general view. Chris Williams saying, I know this is a hypothetical question, but if he had somehow managed to regain the throne, who do you think would be Viserys's hand? I mean, I think the clear implication is if he had somehow managed to do it, the only way he would have done it is through alliances, and the biggest alliance he would have had to have is someone like Doran Martell. So probably him. Caius Ballerina saying, and banged Barbary Dustin. Well, yes, quite. Although she wasn't Barbary Dustin, she was Barbary Riswell at the time. Let's go to Lucian actually answered the Chris Williams question as well, saying Doran Martell, Lord Tarley, or Illyrio, someone he'd trust. Yeah, I think all 3 of those are very possible. Caius Ballerina suggesting Mace Tyrell. Yeah, so I think there's somebody that he thought that he could trust, basically. Snowgal saying, hello, Robert, great topic. I think it would have been enlightening or amusing to have gotten a POV chapter from Viserys. I think he'd be a bit like I'll start that one again. I think he'd be a bit like Victarion in his delusions, but the only Essos POV character in book 1 is Dany. I wonder if you could discuss why that might have been and how a Viserys chapter would have gone. Yeah, a Viserys chapter, I think you're entirely right. It would have been incredibly delusional. It would have been very focused in on what he wanted, a complete lack of awareness or empathy of anyone else. It would have felt like Victarion, also felt a little bit like some of the Cersei chapters when you read her, when she becomes a POV character, where it's just everything is just her perspective on things. She doesn't ever really wonder about why other people might be doing stuff or what the motivations are. It's just about her. Why though? Why did he choose not to have any other Essos POV characters for? It's not just book one. A huge amount of the time with Dany's story, it's just her. Well, I think there's a few reasons for this, and I think it's sort of literary reasons as much as anything else. Why? At the beginning, we didn't have any Viserys chapters. We just had Dany. I think that gives us sympathy. When you read, if you go back and you read those first 2 or 3 Dany chapters, it's the only thing we know, because we don't see this from anyone else's perspective, and your heart goes out to her straight away. She's 13. She's being abused by her older brother. She's being married off to somebody that she doesn't know and is quite frightened of. Taken off into a land she doesn't know, people speaking a language she doesn't know. It's horrendous, and this gives us sympathy for her as a character right from the beginning, which I think was one of George R. R. Martin's aims there. It's also one of the ways that he tries to write, is that he tries not, because he has so many POV characters, he can't always get this, but he tries to be just telling the story in a place from one perspective. So we see when Sansa's up in the Vale, we're only reading it from her perspective. Sam's story, we're largely only hearing it from his perspective. When he heads down south, Arya, ditto when she goes up to Braavos. He tries to keep it just to this one perspective. Obviously, sometimes you will get a couple of different characters in the same place at the same time, but he tends not to overlap POVs much. So even if you get 2 characters in the same place at the same time, you don't see the same thing from both of their perspectives unless they're sort of looking back. I did look at one of the Cersei chapters when she burns the Tower of the Hand, and we see that from her perspective. And Jamie was there at the time, and we see later from his perspective when he looks back on a bit of it and thinks about it, but we don't actually see his perspective at the time. So he doesn't like doing crossover POVs. So that's sort of a writing style thing. But there's also a sort of a slightly bigger point to how he wants to show us Dany and her experience, which is that this is very lonely. And this is entering into a world that you do not know and understand. And he's showing that by this all just being from her POV. The other POVs on other people, where there's often a little bit of crossover and we see a little bit about what's happening, and we might get somebody, Tyrion might give us some thoughts about something. But here, no. She heads out into the Dothraki Sea. She goes to Vace Dothrak. She doesn't know what's going on there. She heads out across the Red Waste. She comes to Karth. Who are these people? What do they want? How does she react? What's happening? She comes to Astapor. What's going on there? All of this time, it's just her perspective. We don't know where we're going to a new place, and we don't know what to expect at any given moment in time until right towards the end, when suddenly we start getting a Barristan chapter. But that is because she's about to disappear off into the Dothraki Sea, and he has to introduce Sir Barristan as a new POV character to show us what's happening in Meereen when she's gone. But broadly speaking, he wants that experience of the first 3 books or so, 3 or 4 books actually, to be us going through this with Daenerys, not knowing what's out there, and to experience this. It's just her on her own. The only connection she has back to her past life, Viserys, dies really quite early, and from that moment on, she is the last Targaryen as far as she's concerned. So that's the kind of feel that who can she trust? She doesn't know who she can trust. Quaithe is there getting her to question everything. The information she's got from the House of the Undying is just so mysterious. People close to her, that she thinks she can trust, she learns she can't, like Jorah, and it's just deliberately closed in. So we experience this with her, and experience her feeling of just being on her own. Let's go to a question from Martin S. saying, if Cersei had slapped Joffrey a second time, do you think he'd actually have had his mother executed? The way I see it, it's hard to be sure he would not, given his nature, but I'm not certain. Yeah, so I don't know. Does Joffrey go through with his threats? It's quite hard I suspect with his mother, no. He does back down against authority when it comes to him. When his grandfather Tywin basically tells him to go to bed, he goes to bed, even though he is the king of the Seven Kingdoms. Similarly, he's bullying towards Tyrion all the way through. He's bullying towards Tyrion once he's king, but he doesn't really follow through with his threats. He just wants to make him look small, pun intended, and he wants to laugh at him. No, I think is the short answer. Perhaps as much that he's scared of the consequences from other people, from authority figures, people like Tywin, people like Kevin, even his mother. So I think that when he got older, if he'd survived, then he would have followed through a whole lot more. The big exception to that, obviously, is the beheading of Ned Stark, but that was just like an instant thing. He could say it happened straight away. I'm blurry, apparently, according to Lady Pushkins. I do apologize for that. Hopefully I will unblur again at some point soon. It's probably just my internet connection, so apologize for that. Right, let's go to some questions from my patrons. King of Imps saying, a lot of focus is put on the every time a Targaryen is born, the gods flip a coin saying. It certainly seems like with Viserys, he got the wrong side of the coin, but realistically, did he ever get a chance at not being terrible, given the circumstances of his life? Born of an abusive marriage, the spare son, destined to be married off to some other family, then dispossessed and exiled and relying on the mercy of people like Illyrio with their own agendas. Not to take any blame away from him, the bad things he does, but he never seems to be in a position to make good choices. At any point, could Viserys have lived a better, happier life, or was he always destined to end the way he did? Commander Ray asking a similar question, saying, Viserys only knew his parents for a short time and was heavily coddled, and then spent the rest of his life without a parent and had to help raise Dany while harboring a need for revenge and a desire for the Iron Throne. How do you think this affected his mental state? Do you think it would have been different if he was just raised like young Griff or even just had a home? So, yeah, this is... this is a nature nurture thing, obviously. Was he always going to be like that, or was this because of the circumstances that he lived in? I think it clearly didn't help. The only clue we really have is Barristan, who knew him when he was young, before he was 7, who basically said, yeah, he was always a bit like that. So I think that seems to have been his nature, was along these lines, but certainly not a lot really went to help him out and get the better of that. So yeah, an abusive relationship his parents had. The being coddled as a child, as well as all of the opulence of being a prince of the realm. The sense of, and we have to remember that he went into life as a teenager knowing that his father, his brother, his nephew, his niece had all been murdered from in his eyes. His mother had died in childbirth for the sister who he now suddenly adds as a teenage carer. Basically, he had to then bring up his sister. All of the life he thought that he was going to be leading has been brought down crashing before him. Nobody takes him seriously. Nobody gives him what he thinks is his due. It's no surprise he turned out as he did, but the clear implication, I think, is that he was always going to be a bit like that. Maybe if they'd stopped in Braavos for longer, that seems to have been a happy time for Daenerys, which seems to imply that, given how strong an influence Viserys was on her, that he must have been in a happier place, because if he was unhappy, he would be taking it out on her. But she was happy. She remembers it as this kind of idyllic time in her childhood. So maybe, perhaps, if that time could have been extended, if Willem Darry had lived, if he got a good mother figure in his life, who knows? But he was always going to be a bit like that in any event. Joel the Dreamer saying, I do not believe Benjen went to the wall willingly. I believe Eddard exiled him for his part in helping Lyanna run off. Well, I did a video on this ages ago, so I won't dig into all of that. I believe that Benjen did go to the wall because of his part in what happened with Lyanna. And not telling people. But the extent to which this was Ned sending him off or him doing it as a matter of honor, I think we will never really know. It's noticeable, I think, that their relationship on the TV show, Benjen and Ned, seem to be very strong. In the books, it seems a little bit more strained, it has to be said. Yes, they kind of meet up. Benjen comes down, not regularly, but he's certainly been down a few times to Winterfell. But when Benjen's there thinking, hey, maybe Jon could come up to the wall, it's sort of via third parties that he tries to get the message to Ned. He talks to Maester Luwin and Cat, and it's like eventually Ned goes, okay, I guess I have to talk to Benjen. It's not as strong a relationship, so clearly there's a tension there. I don't think we will know. It's probably a bit of both, whether he was exiled up there by Ned or whether he decided on his own honor that he should go up. Question from Mrs. Gerard saying, do you think that Dany will become somewhat like Viserys? I mean, she's not going to be exactly like Viserys. She's already shown there are elements to her character which are completely different. She has got a degree of empathy that Viserys never had. She cares for, as a sort of a mission statement, the freeing slaves. That's not something Viserys would ever have thought of. So she is not the same as Viserys, is I think the first thing we have to say. We do have to acknowledge the fact that George R. R. Martin has basically told us that she is going to go down a darker path in the next book, and that is a kind of a fire and blood invasion-y path. Now, it's not that she's going to become more like Viserys. as a character, other than this obsession with retaking the Iron Throne, which I think will grow in her. The arc that we think that she's going to have is going to be something like getting the Dothraki onto her side, heading down to Marine. She's got a navy which is conveniently coming to that she can take. She's got several sellsword companies now working for her. She's got the Unsullied. She's got her dragons. She is going to be heading westwards with not just what Viserys thought he would, but many times more than Viserys would. So she is going to be complete, and she will think, I'm completely sure that at some point in that voyage, she will think back to Viserys and think something along the lines of, this is what he always wanted, and now I'm doing it. Now, that is where the Echo, I believe, kind of begins and ends. She's not going to be like him as a person, but if she gets more obsessed with the invasion, then that will be there. Andrew K saying, I think Dany will turn slightly darker, but overall I still see Dany as generally the anti-Viserys, anti-traditional Dragon Lord, ethically anyway. Yeah, so anti-traditional Dragon Lord, definitely. And I think that the slavery, the freeing the slaves thing is huge in this. I mean, it's obviously actually huge in the world, but in terms of how she's perceived, because she is, as a Valyrian and someone with dragons, you might expect her natural allies to be people like Valantis and her natural enemies to be people like Braavos. But that's not really the case. Valantis are sending a navy against her because she frees the slaves, even though they consider themselves the heirs to Valyria, and she is a Valyrian with dragons. Braavos, the first law of Braavos, that is no slaves. And so suddenly they might be going, well, hang on a moment, this is the best way to get rid of slaves in all of Essos. But she's also a Targaryen on a dragon, so they're going to be a bit more conflicted. So yeah, there are layers to this. Joel the Dreamer saying, if Lyanna lived, Eddard would not let her go unpunished. To my mind, the only just conscience is to expel her from the nobility. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't think Ned's that harsh. I don't think he is. His greatest strength and weakness is his love for his family. And I think that if she genuinely, which is what we think, if she genuinely fell in love with Rhaegar and had his child, then I think that he would not, if it were up to him, he would not sort of kick her out in any way. He would not punish her in any way for following her heart. I don't believe that that's the kind of person that he is. Yeah, I mean, I think I'll just go there. The thing with Benjen was slightly different in that his crime, as it were, was not saying anything, and him not saying anything led to a civil war. Him not saying anything led to tens of thousands of people dying, and that will have weighed on Benjen's conscience. So that's the sort of the difference there. Let's go to a question from Alhad saying, greetings, Robert. What do you think were Illyria and Varys' plans for Viserys? I think he had to die anyway if they were planning the young Griff usurpation for so long. And Magmafrost 13 says, hi, Robert. I don't believe we ever have any indication that Viserys was aware of Fagon. However, Illyrio is strongly tied to Fagon, so why do you think Illyrio kept Viserys in the dark about his existence? Was Fagon aware of Viserys? Did he apparently widespread rumors of the Beggar King. The best answer I have found is that Illyrio wanted Viserys and Daenerys to distract King Robert from Phagon. But do you think that's a better answer? Okay, so a couple of questions here about Illyrio and Varys's plans, and who was aware of what. So, was Viserys aware of Phagon? No. There's absolutely no hint that that's the case. Was Phagon aware of Viserys? Well, he'd been traveling around with John Connington and the gang. He will have been made aware. I'm sure that there was this person, that Viserys was out there. Like he was made known that Dany was out there. So that's that. Why, however, would Illyrio not tell Viserys about Phagon? Well, how would it advantage him? Not at all. If the plan was for Viserys to go invading Westeros and then Phagon to come afterwards with the Golden Company, which seems to have been the plan, to come in and take over, how would this help that plan if Viserys knew that there was somebody else who might wish to claim the throne? It would distract Viserys away from the thing that Illyrio wanted him to do. Because we have to remember who Phagon, for any show only people, Phagon is somebody who claims or has claimed for him that he is actually Aegon Rhaegar's son. Now, this is important in terms of the line of succession, because, as we said earlier, Viserys was made king when normally you would expect Viserys was named heir when normally you'd expect Aegon to be named heir on the death of Rhaegar, because Aegon was the first son of the first son. So normally you'd expect him to do it. Now, not without precedent, but Aerys decided to go to Viserys instead. But we know what the Targaryens are like. There's a history of contested successions, and Viserys will not have looked around and gone, oh, so here's my nephew who claims to be next in line. That's fine. He will have immediately gone and tried to confront him, and that is not what Illyrio wanted. So was Illyrio wanting Viserys and Daenerys to distract King Robert from Phagon? Well, sort of, yes. The original plan, this, as I say, they shifted plans quite a bit, but the original plan was that Viserys would get the Khalasar and come and invade. Dany, they just assumed she would just die. If she got married to Khal Drogo, they didn't even think about her. She's gone. She's out of there. Doesn't matter anymore. So they were actually surprised when she survived, and even more surprised when she gets her dragons. At which point they shifted their plans, because dragons being around does make you change your plans a little bit. So that's, it's a sort of an oversimplification, but I think it's the right one to say, yes, Viserys was the distraction away from Phagon, but not so much a distraction as the person who creates the path for Phagon to follow. Let's go to Maura Lee. Actually, halfway through, what I always do, I've already said thank you to my moderators. You do an amazing job. Thank you. Patrons, thank you as well. I always say it. I always mean it. I can't do what I do without your support. So that's why I prioritize patrons' questions here. One thing I will just say, if you are a $10 plus patron, then do check Patreon at the moment, because one of the perks at that level is you get a chance every now and then to influence the content that I make. And as advertised last week, I've done a little poll to say what live stream topics should I do after this. We've been doing this series all the way through about the Targaryen rulers, and this we've kind of reached really the end of this. But what do we do after this? I've given 3 options. When I looked a little bit ago, then what was leading was a breakdown of some of the main houses in Westeros. So I was thinking not just Stark Lannister, but maybe a few of the slightly smaller but still really quite interesting houses, the Danes and the Reeds and so on. But there are other options there if you'd like me to be doing live streams on characters from Robert's Rebellion, say, or characters from A Song of Ice and Fire, then go there and have a vote. So if you're a $10 patron, now's your time to influence what I do. If you would like to support this channel, the best way to do that is via Patreon, patreon.com/InDeepGeek. There'll be a link appearing somewhere if you're watching live in the live chat. If you're watching back a bit later, down in the description. Okay, thank yous out of the way. Let's go to a question from Maura. If Fagon, which is sort of connected with this actually, if Fagon was truly Viserys and Dany's nephew, I'm curious why that secret was kept hidden from them for so long. Do you think it was because Illyrio and Varys did not trust Viserys with that secret, that Viserys would try to have his nephew killed in order to protect his own right to the Iron Throne? Yes, I think that's exactly it. He, in any way you look at the family tree, he's ahead of, and line of succession, he's ahead of Dany, as he has think Dany in his mind. But somebody who is the firstborn son of his older brother, yes, that is definitely a risk. Andrew Case saying Fagon may have been a contingency plan. Viserys possibly the first choice, and Fagon was the fullback. Had Viserys worked out, Fagon still would have had huge influence via Dawn. Yes, I mean, I don't think. I mean, my take is based as much as anything on my idea of who Fagon is and the probable family connection in with Illyrio Mopatis, which means that I personally don't think he's the backup. I think in any event, it became very clear to Illyrio that Viserys is not a good candidate to be king himself. When you live with Viserys for 6 months, I think that you probably don't. You realize what kind of person he is. So I don't think that even if he had once been first choice, I don't think he would have survived the living with Illyrio. Let's go to Callie Summers. Dany and Jorah talk about how Viserys couldn't take the Seven Kingdoms even with a big army, but probably no one could, including Dany. But if it was Dany, Viserys, and Drogo or Rhaego on the dragons, he actually is pretty young when he dies. Give him 10 years to grow up a bit, learn to ride a dragon, and I think that would give him the motivation to learn at least the basics of fighting. Targaryens seem very capable of changing their personalities over time after all. Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. He becomes a different proposition if he has a dragon. Could any big army take Westeros? Well, a big enough army definitely could, particularly in a weakened state. So this is the other half of the equation. We talk about the Varys Illyrio plan in Fagon and Dany and the Dothraki and Viserys. That's only half of it. The other half is what Varys is doing in Westeros, and the more you dig into it, the more you see quite what he's doing to weaken the Seven Kingdoms, helping encourage them go to war, definitely, but also who's there sowing the seeds of getting the right people, the clever people out from King's Landing, ideally over to help his side. Barristan Selmy was in King's Landing and ended up over on Essos. Tyrion, the same. You get the epilogue to A Dance with Dragons, the very last chapter we have. Kevin Lannister, basically, we see Varys, who's been hiding in King's Landing. He kills Kevin Lannister, and he does a little bit of monologuing, does Varys. And he basically says, it's nothing personal, Kevin. It's just that you're being a bit too competent. You're running King's Landing a bit too well, and I can't have that. My plans require King's Landing not to be governed effectively, so you had to go. So the other half of the plan is to weaken Westeros, and there's no doubt that Westeros now is incredibly weak. Most of the armies have been out in battle and have been weakened. There's still swathes across the Riverlands not in a position to be defending themselves really at all, and the North aren't about to come in and do anything there. That's gone now. The Vale is not getting engaged in anything. The Iron Islands are not wanting to be involved. But that you go through and you just see this is the time to invade. And so if you did have a big enough army and a competent general, then yeah, perhaps now is the time to do it. What would Viserys be a competent general? Probably not. And also the Dothraki in an open field, unstoppable. Against a castle in a siege, no, not so much. So on Dragonback, however, yes. If he could have reached a point where he had a dragon that he could be riding with Dany and somebody else, yeah, of course they could. The original Targaryens took all of Westeros with just 3 dragons. Let's go to Maura Lee saying, if Viserys had survived and lived after the death of Dany's first husband, do you think he would have tried to force Dany into a marriage with him to strengthen his claim to the Iron Throne? How do you think events would have then played out, especially if he and Dany had the 3 dragons on their side? What would become of Fagon's claim there? Well, Fagon's claim, as we mentioned already, it would come down to a fight. But in terms of if he had survived, would he have tried, and Dany survived Drogo's death, would he have tried to marry Dany? Well, if there were no dragons around, I suspect that he would then try and get her married off to somebody else where he might be able to raise enough money to get an army, because he was so obsessed with invasion. Whether she would have allowed that, she grew a huge amount in that first book. Whether she would have allowed that is another matter entirely. Would he, but with the dragons, if the dragons were there, would he have decided, well, he's just going to marry her? I think probably yes. Again, this is just what's going on in his mind, not what's going on in Dany's mind. She, when she was younger, just assumed she would marry Viserys. But does that mean that she will? Not. By the end of book 1, she's a very different person, and she is considering herself mother of dragons. Diego Godoy saying, "Hola, Robert. Hola. Did Viserys know that he was betrothed to Arianne Martell? If not, who should have told him? And would this knowledge have affected his overall plan to recover the Iron Throne?" Well, did he know? No. He was still very young at the time, still a child. Who should have told him? Well, I suppose you could argue Willem Darry, but we don't really know the nature of how he died. Was there the opportunity then for him to pass things on to Viserys? Maybe by that point, no, there wasn't. So basically you get Dawn and you get Willem Darry, and also the Sea Lord of Bravos. Now, the Sea Lord of Bravos witnessed it. As I said, I think the Sea Lord of Bravos changed. If you're sort of looking between the lines there, I think that changed, which was what precipitated them being kicked out. So it's entirely possible that Willem Darry died, but thought that the Sea Lord would tell Viserys when he grew up, but the Sea Lord got kicked out himself, and that never happened. So that kind of makes sense to me. Would it have changed things? Yeah. He would have gone over to Dawn straight away, I suspect. He was looking for an army, and he suddenly found one. Now, the actual treaty itself, from what we see of it, Barristan and Daenerys discuss it in front of Quentyn. It seems pretty clear that the idea is that Viserys would get an army, and then when he's got an army, then they would do the marriage and seal this whole pact, because just Dawn on its own could not take on the might of the rest of the Seven Kingdoms. Viserys had to bring something to this party. But Viserys, I suspect, by this point would have just gone, right, great, I've got an ally, I'm going over there. So I think the whole thing would have backfired a little bit. Andrew K saying one of the least likable things about Viserys is how he views Dany as simply a means to an end for him. No genuine love there at all. Yeah, agree 100%. Let's go to Exotic saying, what would Viserys have thought of Aegon's prophecy? Who could have told him? Is there anyone outside of the Targaryen line that knows about it? Well, this is the big mystery. Certainly he doesn't seem to know it. Rhaegar, we assume, knew it, or at least he knew the prince that was promised prophecy. What would he have thought of it? Well, I think he would have probably just focused in on the bit that he needed to retake the Seven Kingdoms, and then he would worry about the rest of it. But yes, the idea that this was ordained by prophecy would work for him. Michelle Raimo saying, hello, Robert. I hope all is well with you and Dan. Viserys seems to be under the impression that Westeros was patiently waiting his return, and that once he arrived with his and Daenerys' army, the realm would come flocking to him. Realistically, we, the reader, know that that's not true of all houses, but I always wondered what, if any, houses would have. Do you have any thoughts on which houses would support Viserys if he ever returned to claim the Iron Throne? So I answered this part of this earlier in the live stream, but I'll take this from a slightly different angle. The five houses that he name checks are Tyrells, Redwynes, Darrys, Greyjoys, and Martells. Now, the Martells they wanted it, and as long as he brought an army, then they would be up for it. The Darrys were, but they were just a shadow of their former selves by that point. There are no other people that we know of. There's probably a few other smaller houses, but there are no other obvious houses that will be, yep, definitely we're behind Viserys. The moment he declares himself, they're going, yep, he's our guy. But the important thing here is that this could shift with politics, with diplomacy, with how a war goes. People could shift their alliances. Say if he'd arrived at the right time and looked like he was winning, perhaps he could have cut a deal with, I don't know, the North. Whether he would want to do this or not is a different matter. But if he agreed that they could just stay as the North and be independent, maybe that would work. That's the kind of thing, in which case maybe the Starks would be at least neutral with him. Whether the Starks would agree to that, whether he would agree to that is a different matter. But that's the kind of diplomatic opportunity that was potentially there. If he went and he won some battles and he looked like he was winning, I suspect a lot of people would have fallen in behind him. There is a person Arya runs into who sort of says something along the lines of, "Oh, well, weren't things a bit better under the Targaryens?" And there probably will be some random small folk or some random people somewhere who had prospered under them and would fall in behind Viserys. Robert Baratheon wasn't loved, but then the Targaryens broadly weren't loved. Aerys wasn't loved. Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer is that if he started winning, people would get behind him. Caius Ballerina saying, was he knowingly lying about having assassins after him and Dany, or just paranoid and delusional? Robert says he never sent any before Dany married. So this is an interesting point, because Robert Baratheon basically says he got persuaded out of sending assassins after them. Jon Arryn was against it, and it's like, okay, there's nothing there. They're just children. They're not a threat. He still wanted them dead, but he kind of got persuaded out of it. And it was only when he learned that Dany was pregnant that's when he hired assassins. Because that's suddenly the point at where a new Targaryen dynasty might emerge. So Viserys, however, one of the reasons why they're dotted around the Free Cities so much was because he told Dany it's because they were on the run from Robert's assassins. Now, was this just him being delusional? I don't think it was quite that simple. It's entirely possible that there were people who would try to assassinate them anyway, thinking that they might get a reward. Even if there was no specific bounty on their head, it's entirely possible that people might do that, because everybody knew that Robert Baratheon wanted all the Targaryens dead. And if you came and just sort of dropped the heads of the last two Targaryens before him, you would get a big reward. So he didn't actually have to do that. Now, we don't read of assassination attempts. We just hear of Viserys being absolutely paranoid about them. So it's, I think, actually a reasonably interesting psychological insight to him, that I think his mind is, well, why wouldn't he? Of course he's going to. Of course, he's after us. He's the usurper. He's the evil person. He's the person who killed my father. He's the person who killed my brother. He's the person who killed my nephews. This is the person who took everything from me. Of course he's still after me. And that is where Viserys' mind is at. So, sort of delusional in that I don't think there were specific hires, but also you can understand why he might think that. Raven's Oath. What even was Willem Darry's plan? They were not seemingly hiding while he was alive. I know there's talk of hired knives, but never confirmed. So his plan seems to have been to take the remaining two Targaryens to the one place and the one person that really you would think twice. In the Seven Kingdoms, you would think twice about 3 times about crossing. You don't want to get on the wrong side of Braavos, because everybody knows that, first of all, Braavos can build a huge navy incredibly quickly. They can build a warship in a day. And they've got the Faceless Men assassins. They are not people you want to get on the wrong side of. So Willem Darry taking them there was quite a good move. If he got in with the Sea Lord, would the Sea Lord stand by if somebody came and assassinated them in his own palace, his guests in his palace, he would not be able to turn a blind eye to that. So this was part one of William Darry's master plan, if we can call it that. And it was actually quite sensible. That was the best place for them to be. Now, while he's there, he then has to have a think about, what do I do next? And this is just a six-year window during which his health declined. So during that time, he brokered a plan to get one of the great houses on side. If they could somehow get together an army, he would have the Dornish on side. So his plan seems to have been, well, we'll keep them in this place of safety, and we'll try and build an alliance that will allow us to retake the Seven Kingdoms when the moment is right. That seems to have been his plan, but then he died. So we didn't get a chance to see, maybe he was trying to negotiate elsewhere. Maybe he was investigating whether he could hire any sellsword companies. But that seems to be hide in the best place possible, get agreements with people that they can come on our side, and then when the moment's right, retake the Iron Throne. Let's go to Maura Lee saying, at one point after Viserys' death, Dany has a dream of him coming back to accuse her of her wrongdoing, to him leading up to his death by the Carl's hands. Do you think she dreamed of him due to her feeling any guilt of his death? Why do you think she had this dream? Okay, so this is an interesting one. This is the last chapter we have before the epilogue, the last chapter we have of Daenerys and the last chapter of A Dance with Dragons. So we have to take this in the context. She does have this dream. Viserys appears to her in this dream, almost a vision, really, and he's there. He basically starts accusing her of betraying her, and she says, you were horrible to me, you did all of these terrible things to me. And he says, yes, but you were just a child, and I fed you and I kept you alive. I taught you everything about what it is to be a Targaryen, and then you betrayed me. And so that's the dream. Now, the context is that she is out in the Dothraki Sea. She eats some dodgy berries. She starts getting visions. She starts getting stomach cramps. Something's going on. We don't really know exactly what it is. She gets visions from Quaithe, comes and visits her again. Remember who you are, Daenerys. The dragons remember. Then she also has a vision of Jorah, and Jorah's there saying, we could have gone and attacked Westeros, but you decided to hang around in the Slaver's Bay for a while. All of these visions that she's getting at this point are her embracing her Targaryenness, the re-embracing the idea that what her mission is to invade Westeros, to reclaim the Iron Throne, because all of her story arc, her narrative arc within A Dance with Dragons is in Meereen, and her trying to settle down, trying to be a good and peaceful ruler in that place. And and this isn't just me sort of making up my own interpretation. You can go and see George R. R. Martin, probably the last time when he sort of commented on a random thing online, he was shown somebody who'd written, I'm sure somebody in the chat can find the link, written an analysis of those chapters, because when the book came out, a lot of people were a bit disappointed with Dany's chapters because she didn't really go anywhere or do much. She just spent all her time in Meereen, and they were hoping that her plot line would progress. And then this breakdown basically points out what happens in Meereen is there's two parts of her character. There's the Targaryen invade places bit of a character, and then there's the wanting to free slaves and govern wisely part of her character. And the latter was ruling for most of A Dance with Dragons. And this led her to compromise after compromise after compromise. The dragons are eating sheep. Well, okay, then I'll lock up my dragons so they don't do that kind of stuff. We need you to reinstate the fighting pits. Oh, okay, then we'll have to do that. You have to marry somebody here so that you can basically joint rule with one of our people. Okay, I'll do that. Each chapter, another compromise, until she's losing touch with her more Targaryen part of who she is, which brings her to Drogon flying her out into the Dothraki Sea, and this series of visions about her embracing her Targaryen side. And then she stands next to Drogon as she sees the Dothraki in the distance, and the sky in the west is the color of a blood bruise. And this is so foreboding. And basically, George R. R. Martin is saying, yeah, she tried that for a whole book. She tried being this good and wise and peaceful ruler of Meereen. Now she's going to go the other way. So that's the context for it. So was this a guilt dream? I don't think so. This was a part of her reestablishing who she is as a Targaryen. And all of the characters who had been pushing her in that direction in one way or other, good ways and bad ways, are confronting her about it. And one of those obviously is Viserys. Kieran McGee, I didn't see a question attached to that. Oh, here we go. Actually saying thanks. Forgot to write anything. It's been a day. Would love a video on House Umber. They seem badass. Well, maybe one day. Maybe I'll look at them. If I do this series, we'll have to see how the poll goes. If we do that series on houses in Middle Earth, maybe I'll do one on House Umber there. Joel the Dreamer saying, if you could go on a date with any female character in this story, who would it be? I don't know if there are many. This is the kind of question I hate. I'll come back to that. Let's go to a question from Jay saying, I hope you're well. Did Jorah intentionally mislead Viserys into danger at Vaes Dothrak? So this was a question. I got a question in the chat about this. Whether this was Jorah deliberately getting Viserys drunk and leading him and with a sword, which would push him to get his just desserts. Now, the story, as we're told, doesn't seem to back it up. Viserys, we're told, he hated the fermented horse milk, maybe understandably, and wanted to drink some wine. The clear implication is that he'd not been drinking much. He probably was the kind of person who did used to drink a lot. And then he managed to find some wine, the first time in ages, and drank a lot of it. And so that, I don't think, was Jorah doing anything. I think that is just Viserys just doing what Viserys does. He got a sword and charged in. Jorah does seem to try to stop him. When he gets into the tent, Jorah does seem to try to stop him from being as stupid as he is when he gets into that tent, even to the point of, you're going to get us all killed. Whereas I like the idea that Jorah is trying to, I mean, I say I like it, makes Jorah slightly more Machiavellian than perhaps he is. He sees a subtle way of getting rid of Viserys. I don't think so. I also think that he was still, although he by this point was starting to move a lot more towards a loyalty to Daenerys, he was still in the pay of Varys at this point, and I suspect that he would have not been told by Varys to do that. Just going back to the chat about it, going on a date with any female character in the story, I'm going to throw this one to the chat. I see some people They're picking up Luna Cascade saying male character Oberyn Martell, of course, would I'm sure be a fun date. Cersei, not 100% sure of that, but yeah, let me know in the chat who you think would be the best date in Game of Thrones characters. I think you can make up your own criteria for this, but surviving to the end of the night is probably the bare minimum that you'd want from this. So Jay saying it feels far-fetched that anyone, Illyrio, etc., believes that arranging Dany's marriage to Drogo would lead to Viserys being provided with an army. Am I missing something? Well, this I think it's a really interesting question because clearly Illyrio knows, as Jorah does, because they say this to Viserys, that this isn't a business deal. This isn't what he thinks this is. This isn't he marries Daenerys off to Khal Drogo and in exchange he gets an army. That's not what it is. Now, given that, why is he pushing for it? Why does he believe that this will happen? Given the fact that for a huge amount of time, Khal Drogo seems to actually have no real interest in doing that. Well, you have to say either because he's very naive or because someone, and I think this is Varys in this case, is being incredibly manipulative and quite subtle. So if you look at the high level of how this story goes, is that Illyrio and Varys work in tandem. Illyrio sets this up. He gets Dany married off, and they head off, and they clearly both know Drogo's not going to go for this straight away. He would need something to push him in that direction. Now, what happens is that Varys then informs the king that Dany is pregnant. And Robert Baratheon reacts in the way that probably Varys knew that he would, say, we'll need to get an assassin. This is the small council meeting where Ned quits, incidentally, where he storms out. And so the assassin basically is hired, or they put the call out, if you want to go and assassinate her, great, go for it. But Varys, secretly alongside this, writes to Jorah to say there's going to be an assassination attempt on Dany, stop it. Which he does. There was the wine cellar, that gets dealt with. Now, what happens next is that Khal Drogo, then he hears about this. There's somebody tried to assassinate Dany. Who tried to assassinate Dany? Robert Baratheon tried to assassinate Dany. The guy who's there sat on the Iron Throne that my new wife, who I love, who is pregnant with our firstborn child, desperately wants that Iron Throne. Well, in that case, I will now. I've got a reason for it. And he goes off, changes plans, and they head west. So they are going that way. Khal Drogo was taking his Khalasar to invade Westeros. The whole story could have been very different if he hadn't died. The whole story would have been very different. They were going west. They were going to go over. They were going to invade Westeros. And we kind of forget that because Drogo then quite quickly dies, and so the whole thing's off. And then the dragons arrive and everything's changed. But yeah, so if you look at this as Varys being manipulative and Illyrio understanding what Drogo is like, they both know he's not going to go for this straight away. He needs something to push him to do this. And what is that? Robert Baratheon trying to assassinate his pregnant wife is enough. So that, I think, is what we have to say. Not that they were being naive, but that they had figured out how to do it. Luna Cascade saying, how did Khal Drogo tolerate Viserys as long as he did? Because Dany wanted him to. It's very clear that he didn't like him. He would have killed him normally, but because Dany, she basically pled on Viserys's behalf many times and said, no, I don't want you to kill him. He's my brother. Don't do it. Increasingly, though, she was allowing them to sideline him, laugh at him, belittle him, until eventually, which what I said, I think, when I at the start of the stream, if you read the text of that chapter, when the Golden Crown happens, she gives the nod, yes. It's her final decision. Khal Drogo is looking to her, and she allows it. Finally, she allows it. That's why he was holding back. I threw the who would you date question into the chat. Andrew K saying maybe Val, likely won't end well, but what the heck. Shelley J saying Carl the maid for me. Cast Ballerina, the original Rhaenys. Lady Pushkin saying Tormund. Idiotic Games saying Podrick. I think that's a show thing there going on there. Yeah, lots of really good. Another vote for Tormund. Agree Weirwood saying about Jorah here with the was he trying to take out Viserys, saying Jorah was sneaky enough to be a spy. He's sneaky enough to take out Viserys. We don't know that wasn't an order. No, we don't know it wasn't an order. It's left open, so it is possible. I'm not saying it definitely didn't happen, but at the same time, it's also it's quite an open-ended plan. You can be sure that perhaps he could have got him to the point where he got him drunk and he gave him a sword and he knew that he would go in there and make a scene, but he wouldn't know what the end result of that scene would be. And there was a point in that where he seems to genuinely think that his own life was in danger because of Viserys's actions. So on balance, I think probably not, but it could have been. Stephanie Frederick saying a date like sitting next to somebody at a tourney. Yeah. Maybe that's a Westerosi date. Right, let's go to Kolnitsky saying, asking the important question, does gold melt so easily? The short answer is no. And George R. R. Martin has been asked about this because he was basically, some scientists said, well, hang on a moment. You can't just put gold into a cooking pot over a wood fire and then it just melts like that. That's not what the melting point of gold is. I'm not a scientist. I don't know what the melting point of gold is either, but he just kind of held up his hands and basically said, yeah, but it's cool and this is magic. So that's what happened. So yeah, sometimes he just does things because they're cool. Question from Commander Ray saying, I always felt the way Illyrio and Varys treated the Mad King's children while raising young Griff to be king seemed off, more like that they didn't really want them in the picture while their chosen gets out on the throne. What are your takeaway there? Yes, so I mean, I think I've sort of attacked this one for slightly different directions and slightly different questions, but yeah, they didn't want young Griff, Fagon, to be involved with Viserys or Dany while they were growing up, while the plan was still being developed. They would eventually have to meet, but only once he'd gone through all of his training and only once initially the idea seems to have been only once the invasion had already happened. Later, once Dany had her dragons, they did shift it to, okay, this is where they're going, incidentally. The plan was when they go on the Shy Maid, that boat, they're going all the way down the River Royne. They're going to Volantis, which is right at the bottom of the River Royne. And that's because they're trying to figure out where Dany's going. let me fill in another bit of this plan for you. So they'd written off Daenerys. They thought she was just going to die. Then suddenly they hear about her in Karth, and she's got dragons, and this changes everything. She's still alive, and she's got dragons. Okay, so we need her on side. So suddenly there's this thought that maybe we should get Fagon and her hooked up, and the two of them can join forces, and they can attack. And Illyrio sends two people off to go and get Daenerys. He sends with some boats. He sends Barristan off with Strong Belwas, and they go off to find Dany and bring her back. Basically, that's the idea. But then she accepts the boats, but then changes her mind part way and says, well, we could just stop off and pick up an army. Why don't we sell the boats and we can get an army, the Unsullied, in Astapor? This is partly Jorah helping her thinking here, but that's the decision she makes. Okay, so then this Illyrio and Varys kind of, okay, so we've not brought her back now. She's in Astapor, and she's taken Astapor, and she's freed the slaves there, and she's gone on to Yunkai, and she's freed the slaves there, and she's now gone to Meereen. And their thinking was, okay, so she's decided to do the overland route. From Meereen, you can just get the road, one of the old Valyrian roads that heads west all the way across and ends up in Volantis. And so that's the point at which they go, right, so we'll send young Griff with John Connington and co down on this boat, which ends up in Volantis. That's where we're sending the Golden Company. We'll meet up with Dany there. She'll have an army and some dragons. We'll have an army, and we can meet up, and surely we'll just join forces there and then launch an invasion. So that seems to be their plan. But then Tyrion persuades Fagon, yeah, just don't worry about that. Just launch your invasion now. So he joins up with the Golden Company and launches invasion then. So that was the shifting plan. And of course, Dany then stopped in Meereen anyway, and then went off up to the Dothraki Sea. So basically, young Griff was brought out of where he was hiding or being trained the moment that they thought, okay, we want him joining up with Dany with this army. Caius Ballerina asking, what do you think would have happened to Viserys if he had stayed with Illyrio and not gone off with Drogo? Yeah, it's interesting. I think he would have got bored and increasingly demanded to know where his army was. So I don't think that there's... If he had stayed, then I think he would have regretted that very quickly, because Dany would have headed off. And then when they did come back many months later, if this had happened, I don't think Khal Drogo would have put Viserys at the head. He would have been doing this for Dany, not for Viserys. So he would have survived for longer. Maybe he wouldn't have died. He would have, if the Dothraki horde had got all the way across to Pentos and then got some boats and then headed over to Westeros, I'm sure he'd have gone with them. But I don't think that. At some point he would have died anyway. I think he would have just survived a little bit longer. Let's go to Catherine Furseth saying, "Hi, Robert. It seems to me that to a large extent, Viserys' role in the main story of A Song of Ice and Fire is mainly how he impacts and sets up Dany's story. If he was absent from the story, I don't see how it would matter in itself. But as an important background for Dany's story, he is important. What's his main importance? Obviously, he abuses her, but also feeds her, keeps her safe, and taught her who she is." And you also actually quoted that what Maura Lee was talking about, this dream she has of him in A Dance with Dragons, and he says, "You are supposed to be my wife, to bear me children with silver hair and purple eyes, to keep the blood of the dragon pure. I took care of you. I taught you who you were. I fed you. I sold our mother's crown to keep you fed." So, thoughts about his main function? Is it about his role in Dany's life? About teaching her how to be a dragon? Yes, to all of that. I mean, he's got a few roles. The first, I mean, in pure practical terms, it does work, him keeping Dany alive. Yes, he didn't need to be alive, I suppose. Willem Darry could have just looked after Dany, but once they got kicked out from Bravos, she was just 6. She only would have survived, but she only survived because she had an older brother who could look after her. So keeping her alive and fed was his, I mean, real world, if you want to put it that way, reason for being there. In terms of his function in the story as a whole, it makes us sympathetic Dany. I've mentioned this before. This is one of the key things that George R. Martin is trying to do in these early chapters, is that she is being sold off against her will by an abusive person to what looks to be another abusive person. We are supposed to feel incredibly sympathetic towards her, and Viserys is the way of doing that. Secondly, it shows us Targaryens. We have Dany, who we obviously see grow as a person through this story, but and we have Aemon, but he's very old by this point. The only other real Targaryen we get to see is Viserys, and so he is showing us a little bit. Maester Aemon clearly seems to be quite a good guy. Dany, we're supposed to be sympathetic towards. This is showing us the dark side of Targaryens. This is showing us why we shouldn't just see them as these wonderful people who might be freeing slaves and claiming back the throne that was so cruelly taken from them. No, this is showing us a dark side of Targaryens that we might have been told about, but we're being shown. And it's the classic writing thing: show, don't tell. There's one thing saying, oh, there were all those terrible, remember Maegor the Cruel, he was terrible. Remember this Targaryen and that Targaryen, and they were terrible. Every time a Targaryen is born, the gods flip a coin, etc., etc., etc. You can tell us that, but that is nothing next to showing us what a Targaryen who is a bit on the edge is like. And then the third thing, which we've already mentioned, but it's absolutely vitally important, Viserys's role is all the way, he is the constant through Dany's life. The first 13 years of her life, the main focus has been getting back the Iron Throne. It's ours. We were cruelly robbed of this. We're going to get it back. It's the thing which was the main driving force in his life. And you see that echo in Dany. He could have given up. At any point, he could have given up and said, it's not going to happen, is it? It's just us two. I've just sold off the last of the family silver. There's nothing left. It's not going to happen. Let's set up shop somewhere. Let's just try and live as good a life as we can here in Essos. He never did. And Dany's echo is there as well. We're seeing her get these temptations of not going to Westeros, but she is going to carry on going. She is going to go to Westeros, and that is because it's burned into her from childhood that she has to go and reclaim the Iron Throne. Let's go to a question from Kelly Summers, and I've got, this is my penultimate question actually from my patrons, so a good chance to get some more questions into the chat. I'll pick up as many of them as I can. Kelly Summers saying, did Viserys have dragon dreams? We're introduced to him so early that he seems almost cartoonishly cruel. He's around so briefly, his death so quickly overshadowed by everything else happening in the book. And we've since met people like Euron and Ramsay. In hindsight, he reminds me a lot of Aerion Brightflame, Aerys II, and even Dany himself, calling himself a dragon, blithely doing and saying things without the caution befitting his actual station. Prince Daemon probably would have acted the same. He just had a dragon and training to back it up. I mean, I did cover this book, so I'm not going to go over the same ground again. Apology, I should have grouped this one with that other question. But yeah, so there's no evidence to say that he did have dragon dreams. There's very little evidence to say that he had dreams about hatching dragons, other than Cast Ballerina, I think you said in the chat, this repeated phrase he has about waking the dragon, that in Dany's dragon dreams gets turned into hatching the dragon. So maybe he had like a glimpse of it or something like that. He certainly never seems to get the idea of actually hatching dragon eggs, thinking instead of selling them. But this absolute obsession with reclaiming the Iron Throne, it could well have come from dragon dreams. Lady Pushkins, with a slightly unrelated but interesting quote here, saying, "Hi Robert, read this recently and thought it was an interesting quote and very relatable to the story," which is a quote from an Inspector Calls, or descriptor of Inspector Calls. The inspector concludes by reminding the family that actions have consequences and that all people are intertwined in one society, stating that if men will not learn that lesson, then they will be taught it in fire and blood and anguish. Now, the context of this, if you'll forgive the slight literary digression, this is a mid-20th century British play. J.B. Priestley was an excellent writer. He set it, I think, a bit earlier in time, or something like the 1920s. And it's sort of set in pretty much entirely in this English country house with this ancient family, part of the upper middle classes, maybe sort of the ruling classes, and an inspector calls. And he's there basically asking lots of questions about the death of this young woman in the local village. Now, I'm not going to give away the whole thing here, but basically this leads to rounds and rounds of recriminations. It's a critique. It works on many layers. It's a critique of English social structure at the time, as well as capitalism and socialism, and people working for themselves rather than looking out for each other. So this kind of line here, if men will not learn that lesson about actions having consequences and people being part of one society, if men will not learn that lesson, then they will be taught it in fire and blood and anguish. So fire and blood is very clearly the kind of link across here. And this is almost as if it is like you're going to get what's coming to you. And within the context of that, then what's coming to them is world war. And as J.B. Priestley was quite the socialist, a sort of a workers' revolution was probably on his mind as well. That's not what's happening with Dany, but clearly this idea is there that what's been going on in the Seven Kingdoms, they will reap it by actually having, if they're ripping themselves apart, then somebody else is going to be coming in. So yeah, interesting, and thank you for that. Charis Ballerina Tinfoil 1. Barristan only says Viserys was bad as a child to justify abandoning the Targaryen family. Oh, interesting. Don't. That's does he? Why does he abandon them? I mean, we're never really 100% told all of his thinking there. He gets injured. So what's interesting is that he's there at the Battle of the Trident. He gets injured at the Battle of the Trident. He's on the losing team. By the time he's back in action, the Targaryen reign had fallen. Robert was going to be king. This was very obvious. And then Robert pardons him because he's a bit of a legend, Barristan. And Robert pardons him. Are you willing to serve the new king? And at that time, there seemed absolutely no hope of the Targaryens coming back. And so I think this is pure. I mean, he would have dressed it up in some kind of way, but it's sort of pragmatism that actually you could either fall on your own sword by saying, well, I tried to protect my king and I failed, or you say, well, I suppose there's a new king. I will try and earn back my honor by serving this new king even better. I suspect the thought of whether Viserys would have been a good king or a bad king never really crossed his mind. Viserys was 7. It's going to be a good 10 years at least until he's actually a king. So what he's like as a person is not so much of an importance. Daenerys is an anagram of Sir Dane. He's her real father. This is another bit of tinfoil. Well, I didn't know Daenerys is an anagram for Sir Dane. So I don't believe that he's her real father for a number of very practical reasons. So Daenerys, we know when Daenerys was conceived. She was conceived just before we've had the Battle of the Trident, and just before Rhaella and Viserys get sent over to Dragonstone, at which time Arthur Dane is down in hundreds of miles away in the Tower of Joy. So from a very practical perspective, no, that's not what's happening there. Aerys was absolutely focused on making sure that nobody else had the chance at all to get anywhere near Rhaella. He had 2 other women sleeping in her bed. That's how paranoid he was about anyone getting close to her. So a fun tinfoil there. The other thing, incidentally, just as an incidental, is so I'm sure George R. Martin will be, is that you would never say Sir Dane, as in Sir and then a surname. You would family name. You would just say Sir first name. So it would be Sir Arthur or Sir Arthur Dane. It would never be Sir Dane. And so you will not find that. George R. Martin is clearly aware of this, and you will not find that through all of A Song of Ice and Fire, and also in British culture, which is obviously where this comes from. You don't get Sir Selmy, for example. It's Sir Barristan. Martin S. saying, who is more evil, Joffrey or Padan Fain from the Wheel of Time? Well, it's got to be Padan Fain. Joffrey's just not. I mean, he's clearly a horrible, horrible person. Padan Fain has pretty much literally sold his soul. Okay, let's go through a few more questions from the chat. Agree. Weirwood saying, since he was doing the nasty on the side and wanted Joanna Lannister, he would lock up his wife so no one would be allowed. Yeah, exactly. Shelley J's just heading off. Great to see you. Levax saying Padan Fane is a literal manifestation of human enmity, misery, mistrust, and hate. He's filled with the energy of Shedar Logoth. Joffrey is just a spoilt brat with political power. You said it much more eloquently than I did, but I think we came to the same conclusion. Urias Tosh saying the only way that Aegon's certain reign could have been improved was if Renly survived and served as his hand. Top lads, hell of a handshake duo. Yeah, so Andrew Kay saying Barristan still seems to wrestle with his previous actions with and around the Targaryens. There's still more to unpack with Sir Barristan. Let me just quickly go off on one of Sir Barristan. He is the most frustrating character that George R. R. Martin writes. The amount of times he starts on a thought and does not finish it. And this is because he was there. He was eyewitness to so much, and we could learn so much, but we do not. The amount of times Danny asks him something about, the good old days or Rhaegar or something, and he starts saying things, and then somebody interrupts them, and Danny gets distracted, or she starts yawning, going, "Oh, I'm getting a bit tired. We'll talk about this some other time." It's so frustrating. And also, he has these kind of like throwaway thoughts that hint at so much more. So, for example, particularly when he's thinking of Shara Dane, who he had a massive crush on, and he's sort of like thinking about the whatevers of this, and he sort of says one of the things that what if Rhaegar had trusted him at the turning at Harrenhal? In what way? What was the thing that he trusted someone else to do? Was this that he didn't let him into his little group? How would this have helped? So there's lots of these just little droplets going on here. What if Ashara Dane had turned to him instead of the wolf? And it's just like, so what? So she turned to one of the Starks for help. In what exactly? We're not told, because he's so frustrating, that character. Anyway, let's go to Jorian Quivoy. I've completely butchered your name, but hopefully you know who you are. Apologies for that. Greeting hands. Yes, so I would not have been now. Oh wow. I would love to. Luna Cascade saying, thanks for making my last hour at work pleasant. Off to hit the road. I hope you have safe travels. Wheezy Squeezebox saying, till the end of the moon. Chinese fantasy series, totally worth watching. Excellent performances and plot, beautifully filmed, heartbreaking with a good ending. YouTube in Mandarin with subtitles. Well, there's a recommendation for you all. Thank you very much indeed. The Wrath of Con saying, thanks as always for the live streams. Been going through a lot recently, and this community helps me daily feel more like myself. Well, every blessing to you. I hope whatever you've been going through eases soon, and blessings start flowing soon. Let's have a quick flick through. Cast Ballerina saying, did the guards at the Tower of Joy know Aerys named Viserys the heir, putting him ahead of Rhaegar's children? Well, we don't know, is the short answer. But the implication is no. Because and this is one of those things which is quite frustrating, because we're sort of relying on Ned's fever dream, and George R. R. Martin has specifically told us not to take it literally. We should just sort of take the feel of it. In Ned's fever dream about the Tower of Joy, he sort of turns up and has this conversation with the Kingsguard, and it's got a bit of to and fro, but basically he sort of says, I looked for you on the Trident at the battle, and you weren't there. And they say, nope, we had better things to do. He said, I was expecting maybe you'd have gone to Dragonstone, and they say, we don't run. It's just like he goes through all of these things, and basically what they're saying is, we're here because this is where our duty as Kingsguard takes us. Now, we shouldn't overinterpret it because it is a fever dream, but there has to be some element of truth in that. And we should probably ignore the details and just take the bigger picture, that they're saying that they have not abandoned their vows by being there. They are there because they have been ordered to be there, because they're protecting, by implication, the heir to the realm. Or even the king, I suppose they might naturally, if they think that Rhaegar is dead, if they think that Aerys is dead, and they don't think that Viserys has been announced the king, then actually the child born from Lyanna, they might think is the literal king. So it's an interesting one. Michelle Ramos saying, we all know that Shara really turns to Howland. Yeah, so I think that Ashara turned to get support from one of the Starks, but, for example, Ned, and Ned shared a tent with Howland. One of the little details that George R. R. Martin gives us about the turning at Harrenhal, and that is, and we know that some things from what we hear, the rumors that things might have happened in Ned's tent involving Ashara, naughty things that maybe we can forgive them because nobody was married, and it was high spirits of attorney, and etc. Everyone thinks this is Ashara and Ned, but actually, perhaps this was Ashara and Howland. Lucian saying, processing family ties is always weird. It's hard to picture Viserys as Jon Snow's uncle. Yes, it is. Just have a flick through, see whether you've got any more. Even harder cast ballerina saying, even harder to pick Daenerys as his aunt, especially after the show. Yes. Euros Tosh saying, if Viserys was captured at the end of Robert's rebellion, would he have been a better person if he was fostered by some great house of Westeros, and which one? I don't think that he would have survived. If he'd been captured in Robert's rebellion, then if Robert Baratheon hadn't killed him himself, then somebody else would have killed him to get onto Robert's good side, in the same way that Tywin Lannister basically ordered his men to kill Rhaegar's children in order to get onto, or to prove his loyalty. So if Viserys had been captured, he would not have survived. Andrew K saying, ironically, Viserys views Dany as a means to his ends, but in the end, he is a means to an end for her, more so eclipsing and moving past him on out of his shadow. Yeah, so this is a thing which, and perhaps with this we'll sort of round off this section, is to say that she will do the thing that he was obsessed with, and didn't think for 1 second that she was capable of, which is attacking and invading Westeros. And she will do it on a much, much bigger scale than he ever imagined. The height of his ambitions were Khal Drogo's Khalasar. And there's every reason to believe that Dany might get not just the equivalent of Khal Drogo's Khalasar, but all of the Dothraki. And in addition, 3 dragons, unsullied, some of the Iron Fleet, some sellsword companies, probably a whole load of support from the Red Priests of Azor Ahai. This is going to be absolutely beyond anything that Viserys ever imagined. And she is doing that at least partly, and perhaps because of a huge degree, because he instilled in her at a very, very young age that the most important thing for them as Targaryens was to reclaim the Iron Throne. So his impact is huge, not just as a person who's there for a little bit of the story, but his impact on Dany will carry on beyond that. Okay, so let's just quickly look forward to where we're going live streams. After this, I will have a look to see how my patrons have voted. As I say, when I last checked, they were wanting me to be looking at houses of Westeros, which will look at some of the bigger houses as well as some of the smaller, more interesting smaller houses. We will still be doing occasional drops into the Lord of the Rings about once a month or so. We will do that, working our way through the Fellowship, the characters in the Fellowship. In terms of videos coming out, what can I tease? What have I got coming out soon? I've got one. People have asked me about this so many times, and I realized I'd never actually done a video on it. So coming out in a week or two's time, I've done a proper deep dive into the idea of, is Cersei the Mad King's daughter? Which adds a whole range of other questions here. If you're already starting to have your mind blown about the possibility of Viserys potentially being Jon Snow's uncle, then let's add Cersei into this mix as well. It's a pretty crazy one, but I'm always spoil my videos, but the in advance. But basically, there's so much evidence. It's very different evidence to the potential is Tyrion or Targaryen evidence, but it is also quite convincing if you look at it from a certain angle. In particular, the links across to Wildfire. If she's not actually a Targaryen, she is being the Aerys II, the Mad King, is being used as some sort of foreshadowing, or she is an echoing of him. So the link is there, regardless of whether it's an actual, real sort of familial link. And so those are a few things to be looking forward to. Next week, we'll come back with, whatever my patrons decide, I guess, in the end. If you are watching this back a little bit later and would like to watch a few more of these live streams, there is a link appearing somewhere around here. If you are coming back a bit, in fact, if you'll come back a bit later and you want to support this channel, there's a link appearing here to Patreon, which is the best way to be doing that if you wish to do so. Okay, that's all for this time. Take care, everyone. I shall see you again next time.